everybody. Are you ready to begin Iowa City City Council's work session for Tuesday, November the 19th, 2019? The first topic is to determine funding source for the $25,000 Houses into Homes contribution. So I'd like to say just a little bit about this before we continue our discussion. It seems to me we can't really focus on the sources of funding for Houses into Homes until we firmly decide whether we want to stick with last meeting's decision. I think, well, I'll speak for myself. I've been involved in numerous discussions about the topic over the past 2 weeks. Those discussions have influenced my thinking. And I know that many of you have been involved in other discussions as well. So I think the first thing we need to do is decide whether we want to stick with our decision from 2 weeks ago. Beyond that, let me say just a few things. I'm going to say something about Houses into Homes, and I'm going to say something about my own decision from 2 weeks ago, and then maybe say something else. But anyhow, I greatly admire the good work that Lucy Barker, Selena McCarty, and other volunteers in Houses into Homes have been doing over the past 2 years. They saw an important community need that was not being met adequately, and then created an organization which has been responding to that need. Moreover, they presented us with a compelling argument about why we should help them by providing $25,000 in one-time funding. Why, one might ask, did they not apply for funding through the standard aid to agencies process? It's my understanding they did not apply for such funding this year because, as a new volunteer organization, they did not even know about it until it was too late to apply. I want to honor their voluntary efforts and take that into account as I make my own personal decision about this tonight. And yet, in retrospect, I think my own decision on November the 4th to provide that funding was based on insufficient information and inadequate consultation with other interested parties, especially major service providers. I meant no disrespect to any of those agencies, all of which are doing vital work for our community's well-being. I deeply respect every single one of them and the individuals involved in them. And as a result of various conversations I've been part of, I now have a much better understanding of their perspective toward our Houses into Homes funding decision 2 weeks ago. So 2 weeks ago, no, not 2 weeks ago, early this morning, I was pretty clear about what I was going to do during this meeting. I was going to recommend that we temporarily defer action on the requested funding and direct the staff to invite relevant organizations to participate in an interagency task force, which would explore ways in which the affected organizations could better coordinate the delivery of furniture to people in need. But that was early this morning. I've had some more conversations since then. So I'm not certain what I think. I would very much like to hear what the rest of you think and take that into account as I come to my own decision. Sure. But key question, do we want to stick with our prior decision?
Yes.
Yes.
I think that, Mary, you bring up some things that I admire you bringing up publicly, just to acknowledge that we all, over the past 2 weeks, I myself specifically, have been able to talk to various people within our community that had concerns about our decision, as well as some that supported our decision. And so I have toiled with a lot of the things that you've mentioned. One of the questions is even, do we form a group together, like Hold It? Do we form a group together to kind of say, what do we do next? And I think there could be some valuable things to that. But there's a couple of things that I that resonate with me. If we halt it, then, and we're not talking, I mean, people think the word emergency may not be appropriate. I think, the need is there, ultimately. If we halt it, I'm afraid that when it comes back to us, it's going to be potentially rushed in the decision-making process by all parties involved. I really think it's a bigger, and it's really because it's a bigger thing. It's not that it's rushed because they can't come together and create a solution. I really think that what we're talking about is bigger than houses into homes. We're talking about how do council deal with an emergency request. I think that's what we're talking about. It's bigger than houses into homes. And the individuals that I've been talking to that would like to have that discussion, I think they already have some great ideas on talking about collaborating and looking at programs versus agencies and all that stuff. So I think the ideas are there. I think there's ways to move forward, but I don't know that, the time frame, it needs to be real intentional and allow it to really, come together. Maybe you'll want to take a different avenue, throughout the process when the groups come together. So that's my challenge. Is I really believe that this is bigger than houses into homes resolution for what the council is doing. Currently, is my understanding that we have two processes. Well, we have a process, and that's what, a lot of this is talking about the process. And I believe in the process. 100%. I think there's value when we're talking about equity, consistency, how we vet individuals. I believe that 100%. I think predictable. I think we need to do that. But there's also the current process of emergency funding, and that comes to council. And council listens and make a determine based on the emergency funding request. I think right now this is a part of that process. We don't advertise it for various reasons, but it's a part of the process. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and stick with my original support. What I would ask is that we prioritize, and staff, I would ask really to prioritize and let us move forward with some emergency plans for requests like this. We want it to be predictable. We want it to have a format, and so that's what I would say. And if any counselors would support that, then we can direct the staff to really, because I think that's very valuable too, is in the future, we really need to figure out how we will deal with emergency funding. Right now, it is council's decision to deal with emergency funding.
Okay, we heard from a lot of organizations who came to oppose this. Either I heard from them through they meeting me or send me emails or anything, but we never heard from the people who benefit out of this. Let me tell you my story. When I came new to Iowa City, I didn't even have bed for my kids. I went, somebody, a friend of mine, she said, what, there is a project called Furniture Project. Go there and get some furniture. I went there, they told me that I have to have a voucher. I said, okay, where you get that voucher from? She said, if I go to the crisis center or if I, the human service or whoever people that I have benefit from them, they can give me that. I went to the crisis center and they wrote me a voucher. I took the voucher, went to the furniture project, was very happy to see that I can find bed and mattress for my kids. I brought them, my kids was very happy. Even the way that my house looked like is even changed after we had the furniture. It look really nice. I start also telling people about furniture program. Whoever come new, I will just refer them to do the same thing that it happened to me. I know a lot of people who benefit out from the furniture project. I was very sad when I heard out they closed, because a lot of people start now finding furniture. The people that I've been referring and asking, I become a source for a lot of low-income people in the community. They come to me and ask me where we can find this, where we can find that. And they came to this, and also the Center for Worker Justice member, most of them are low-income, and they ask for that. We could not find furniture project, no longer there. We don't know how to help people. I help people who graduated from the shelter house. How do I help them? I reached out to Sally Hartman, bless her heart. She is from the Unitarian University Society Church. She and I hope she was here, we were really working hard to find a furniture for the people. We're going around collecting furniture. We ask somebody if they have truck. Sometimes even I advertise it on Facebook. If somebody have a truck, so we can just move this furniture to some people. We really help a lot of peoples. Maybe 4 of them, they graduated from the shelter house through the rehabilitative housing program. The shelter house maybe can give them some, but they cannot give them everything. But because maybe that's done the main work for the shelter house, I appreciate all the organization, all the good work that the organization does, but the furniture project is really important. Some people who met with me, they said, how come just those people, they can work with those organizations, and they don't have to have a standalone like organization or a director who's gonna do this? No, that's not true. If some people know Mazahir, and some people know Sally, not a lot of people know Mazahir, and not a lot of people who in need know Sally, so we can give them help. That's why we need an organization, just like the furniture project, and we need organization who have a person who will be responsible to reach out to those people, a person who I can refer to. I know that many volunteers said they're gonna help the house into home. So volunteer, yes, you are, at the end of the day, you are a volunteer. Sometimes you have time, sometimes you don't have time. The other organization, if they wanna do this, they should have done it between the time that the furniture project closed and the house into home like established. I know they're being doing, but maybe they have a limited capacity to cover the whole community. That's why Sally and I and a lot volunteer, I would like to thank them. I don't want to say names because I will forget some, but I really would like to thank them from here because we being doing this job. That's why I understand, I believe on the process. I understand that we have to follow like the policy of that we establish as a city council. But things could happen. Emergency could happen. If we think this is really something that the community need and it's value a lot of people in this community and this is our value, we have to do it. And I know process is good, but process are not keeping kids from the floor. Process are making kids sleep on the floor. That's why I think we need to do it, and we need to do it not even like those recommendations. I hope if they can fund it immediately so this program can roll, because I know a lot of people waiting there right now. I need to benefit out for this. As long as we're gonna defer this, we are deferring that. We're making kids sleep on the floor more. We're making people sleep on the floor and they don't have mattress on the floor even. I just think deferring this kind of human things is really bad. That's why, please, I will hope we can find 4 more people today to approve this. And after that, we can make sure to talk about how we can fund it. And I will be flexible, because I always say that, don't take anything from the affordable housing. But I will be really flexible, and because I want to keep kids from sleeping on the floor and waiting long time.
Okay, what do the rest of you think?
Well, I've been processing the process, I guess you might say, like I think all of us have. And, it's been an interesting experience for me, learning, as I think I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, that there was even such a need as home furnishings. This was a real need in the community, and how do we address it? And in meeting Lucy and Selena, as Jim likes to say, there's such a thing as persuasive storytelling, and this was, I think, a pretty good example of persuasive storytelling. in terms of explaining what their organization is and how it is operated, and filled clearly what was a gap in the social services that we provide to our community and those most in need. Nevertheless, we've certainly heard from many people in the community that there is a concern about the process that was taken here. So this morning, I was sort of trying to articulate what I consider to be what is the goal that I'm trying to achieve here. And it would be advancing the work of Houses to Homes while ensuring that it is integrated into the social services network that we have. I do think that's important. I don't know. My sense is that there needs to be more conversation in that particular area. So in terms of implementing that goal, what I would like to propose is that there be a discussion among the service providers to achieve that goal of making sure that it's better integrated into the existing system. And one condition I would like to have on that process would be that it would result in what we approved last time, which was one-time funding in the short term for a paid Houses to Home staff person. In terms of the timeline, what I would like to suggest for that discussion would be that it would include, what I understand to be some of the major players in the service provider realm: houses, DVIP, Shelter House, Inside Out, Houses to Home, that those conversations take place over the next few weeks. I was looking at the calendar. We have a work session and a formal session on December 17th. We're going to be hearing from the state DNR on December 5th. So that's kind of, in terms of the timeline, in terms of this thing moving forward, I'm expecting to be a critical variable. Will the state provide funding? It's hard to even decide how we're going to fund this staff person for Houses to Homes without having a full understanding of what the funding sources will be and at what amount. So that would be my suggestion, that we defer. I'm still committed to the staff person, but I would like to, in a sense, formalize that decision on December 17th. I think what might happen during that conversation could influence the outcome, not in any meaningful way in terms of, I think, what our intent was, or this question of the funding of the staff person for Houses to Homes. But
Can you just say exactly what you mean by this conversation between who? I really missed that. What?
So a conversation among some of the critical players that, with respect to the home furnishings piece of providing services.
What that means also.
So that the home furnishings.
No, I mean like
Organizations.
yeah.
the organization. So
I
Shelter
mean the
House.
organization who do the same thing. That's what you're saying.
Well, my understanding is there's a certain amount of overlap.
Can you tell me, can you really be obvious with the organization that provide furniture?
Well, I just mentioned them. So Shelter House, DVIP.
The Shelter House, I don't want to interrupt you really, but I just, if you hear from people, also hear from people who really was working with people through the Shelter
Okay.
House.
Well, I'm proposing who I would suggest. If there is a better group of agencies, so be it. But that those whose mission is not central to providing the home furnishings, but ancillary to providing those home furnishings, participate in a conversation with Houses to Homes over the next few weeks, with the goal of trying to make sure that there is integration of the services of Houses to Homes into the system, the larger network of services that are offered. And again, with the condition that I'm still in support of funding the position, but I would like there to be more conversation among the agencies that are, again, ancillary, have served an ancillary role with respect to providing furnishings.
So, John, if I could just clarify your position then. So, yes, 25,000, yes, houses into homes, you do want a conversation.
Yeah.
If the conversation goes well, that's great. If it doesn't go well, let's say there's disagreement, you would still support.
Yeah, I
you
still
would still
support it.
support
You know,
25,000. Your only point of disagreement with Bruce and Maz is they seem to want to do it now,
Right.
and you want that yes decision to be December 17th.
Correct. And one last thing I would want to say is that the December 17th date, which is roughly a month away, provides an opportunity to, in a sense, I would hope, take advantage of the fact that one aspect of this coming to council rather than through the normal channels is it has really shown a light on this issue. You know, when it goes through the normal channels, it goes through kind of a bureaucratic process, and it's not as visible. This has become highly visible. So what I would hope could take place in the month between now and December 17th is that there be an effort to try to leverage that spotlight and see to what degree the community can help support Houses to Homes and other service agencies, but certainly Houses to Homes has been a focus of this, in their goal of raising funds to house or to provide a paid staff person as a part of their operation.
So,
Let me inject one thing, Rockne, not to disagree or support. When I mentioned the possibility of an interagency task force, that's pretty much what I had in mind. You're just putting it in less formal kind of language. And the entities that I had in mind, I think are the same ones you were thinking of: DVIP, Shelter House, Houses into Homes, Inside Out Reentry, and Habitat for Humanity. I understand they all somehow, in one way or another, for some populations, are involved in delivery of furniture. So, yeah, I think we really do want to get some kind of much better coordination.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
So, at least in terms of expressing my own views, the only point that I'd want to clarify between the mayor and John is you seem to be referring to a meeting. When I think of a task force, at least how I process it, I see an ongoing series of meetings over the course of several months. And I certainly don't have any objection. I think that may be a salutary development of this, that there is some sort of task force moving forward, but I don't want to condition receipt of funding on the task force. I would join you in encouraging them to get together and talk, but I'm not conditioning my support for it on talking, although I think it would be a good idea. My own view on this is I think that really we're an imperfect council trying to address a very difficult issue that's facing our community, which not only is homelessness, but the related issues to homelessness. It is a very complicated question, and there are no simple answers to this. To Bruce's point, I think in terms of this imperfect process, yes, it is less than ideal that we're not going through the traditional process. And I think we could, hopefully one of the things the next council will look at is how can we improve the process is if there are requests that come in throughout the year, do we say no? Wait until next year. One concern I do have with the existing funding mechanism for the nonprofits is I understand that's a very highly technical scoring process set forth by HUD, is my understanding. Correct? There's in terms of what's emergency, what's intermediate, what's not so important. And
That's not by HUD, that's by our own.
Okay, by our own staff.
CDC,
Okay, we've
yeah.
had our factors that we've used.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of that particular process, I think that leaves some good nonprofits that are left out of that process. So I think in this particular context, it is something that is a need. I think it's something we need to address. I'm supporting it. And I think in terms of what I really want to encourage, at least in terms of my own term on council, is how do we encourage new voices, new nonprofits to enter the field without duplication. And I think that's the issue. We all have different approaches in terms of different views of leadership. Some of us prefer more vertical structures in terms of having the traditional structures and everything funneled through that. My own preference is I prefer more horizontal structures in terms of more of a collaborative approach. I know there's been some concerns that some of the people that have spoken out on behalf of Houses into Homes are not the executives, but are some of the staff members that are not executives. At least for me, that doesn't matter. I don't care if it's a part-time employee. I think their voices are just as important as the executive in terms of what their views are. Obviously, they can't speak on behalf of the organization, and each entity has to have their own process in terms of how they do that. But I think this is a real critical issue. And my only concern in terms of the traditional funding mechanism is, my concern is that if we have a dynamic nonprofit like this, what if they can't get through that first year? And how do we ensure that they have adequate funding when they've established a proven track record to address this critical need? I think our legacy organizations have done a great job, but they do have a huge advantage in terms of the year-to-year, how to know in terms of the funding process. So I think for this particular case, I do want to support this. I'm supporting it without condition. So certainly might be a little bit different there, but I encourage the voluntary discussion as far as that goes. In terms of precedent, too, I would bring up that we did last spring give $10,000 to Shelter House, and there was no controversy surrounding that. So I think that was a good thing. I love Shelter House, but it did not generate the emotional response that this particular one has. And why that is, I guess people will probably come up and explain that to us during our public comments. So I'm saying yes to immediate funding without stipulation.
But you would also be willing to do what John is
To
suggesting.
encourage voluntary, I think that is a very good idea that I would like to see them doing, but I'm not conditioning receipt of funding on that.
Okay, what about the rest of you?
I've been really torn on this since our last meeting. I think, as I think back on it, I think that our votes that time were kind of an emotional response to a very compelling story given by Houses into Homes with their mission and what they've accomplished and what they're doing and what their needs are. And we certainly, with that vote, didn't mean any disrespect to other agencies. We've said all along, we've always mentioned that Iowa City's blessed with some very great nonprofit organizations that do some very wonderful work. And we need to continue that sort of effort in the community. Maz, you mentioned that other organizations maybe have a limited capacity to help out the entire community. And from what I've heard, but now I'm not sure exactly how many organizations actually are providing furniture or when they have or what their process is. And I think that if there are others, then it would be an excellent idea to share the resources, say the storage of the furniture and those kinds of things, since that would mean having these groups get together and work together. Cooperation and collaboration can go a long ways, and so I think that would be very important. So I do agree with John that perhaps delay it till the December 17th meeting, which would give the DNR vote time to come through, because if indeed they can get $10,000 from the DNR for the mattress recycling, that certainly is a big step in the right direction and would cut the amounts down. So I think giving them also the opportunity to seek other funds. That would be my decision.
Susan?
There's been a number of, I guess, interesting phrases that have been used, and my position hasn't changed since our last meeting. Persuasive storytelling, emotional response, process, emergency requests. And when I think about all those, it doesn't add up to going outside of our established process. One of the letters we got, and I don't remember who it's from, and I'm not going to look, talked about the extensive evaluation that happens through the aid to agencies process, whether it's emerging agencies or legacy agencies. And I think that's really important. I think that's important so that it's fair to everybody who's applying. They're evaluated the same way, against the same criteria. There's conversations that go on throughout the year, so that everybody is operating under the same set of rules. And I didn't start, and I should have, and I do applaud Houses into Homes for the work they're doing. I do not in any way mean to dismiss that. I think it's important. It's critical work, and again, we do have other agencies doing some of it, maybe not as much as they are. But when we get outside of that process, I think we end up making emotional decisions, as Pauline talked about. It's an emotional response. We end up being we end up responding to the persuasive storytelling, which is persuasive. It is a strong story. It is a great need. It is incredibly important. But the point I would reiterate that I made last time is I believe that we have a lot of other agencies in this community, if they so chose, could come up and make just as strong a plea of persuasive storytelling for their particular provision of services within this community. And if we allow that kind of one-off thing to happen, then we have no process at all, no process at all. I mentioned as I started some of the terminology, and one of them was emergency funding. I do not perceive hiring a full-time executive director as emergency funding. If they had come and said, oh, we don't have gasoline for vehicles, we don't have rental space, I would be much more inclined to say, okay, let's take a look at how we can do that one-time help. But when you're taking something from volunteer to now paid staff, to me, that's not an emergency. It's a whole change and shift of the way an organization is being run. And I go back to what I said 2 weeks ago. I think out of fairness, transparency to all the agencies in this community that are doing incredibly good and important work, that this is not the direction that we should go. I think we have a lot of people here in the audience tonight that are prepared to speak to this, probably at the formal meeting. And if nothing else, I would encourage us to delay any action on this till we actually hear from all of them. But as it stands now, I can't support this.
I want to ask you one question. Your position now, as Rockne repeated many times, you are not objection. You don't have any objection for the hiring the staff, and you agree to the 25. The only thing is you want to see the organization that do some kind of, even some of the organization that you mentioned. I don't know how much they are doing on this. There are few of them. I can say the shelter house because I've been seeing them doing some kind of this. But for the habitat, the restore, I guess they sell stuff. Maybe they give they used to give the furniture project some mattresses, and they give the same thing now to the housing to the home. Some of those organizations, I feel like they don't provide a lot, but they do somehow, from now and then, it's okay. But if you are really, and Rockne also asked you a question, no matter what the outcome from that meeting, if they disagree or if they agree, we still gonna, you saying this. Right. Then my really proposal is, I really would like all those people who are doing something to work together. Even when I told you that, Sally is doing something from her church, she can also come and work with us so we can have more, cooperate. I don't mind that, and I will encourage, even if after they being funded, I really encourage them to work with another organization in the community who are doing the same thing, know that. But if that's the case, why we don't, since you are our forward, why we don't just approve it and ask them to meet and work with those organizations?
Well, as I said, I think, and perhaps I didn't mention this aspect of this month period as well. So it would provide an opportunity for there to be conversations, a discussion among those groups who have some interest in this issue. It would give time for the information regarding our funding sources to become clearer. It would also provide an opportunity to leverage this moment and see if we can't fundraise from it, which could affect the amount that we're talking about. And then lastly, I would say a lot has happened just in the last 2 weeks. And I haven't heard back from Houses to Homes in terms of, their proposal. Have they given any second consideration to that amount that they're requesting? Maybe they have, and they're still fixed on 25,000. I just don't know. But I think it gives Houses to Home an opportunity to really critically evaluate their proposal in terms of not only the proposal itself, but how all these other factors might come into play.
I don't want to defend the housing to home, but I think they did not reach out to us because last time we agree and we even give a city manager, saying that, yeah, you can just go ahead and do it. That's why maybe they think that's a done deal. They never thought that we're going to change our mind later if another organization just come up and say, no, you cannot do that. And that's why I guess they didn't reach out to us, but now maybe after you said this, I don't know what's going to happen, but I just feel like if you are going to do it anyway, you said it doesn't matter what the outcome. That's why I was encouraging you to do it now and ask them to go and meet with those organizations and work with them.
Yeah, I do feel that a month of time to sort of look at all the variables and aspects of this would be really helpful for all concerned. And I think, I'm sort of remembering to some degree, in some ways, the Pedmol benches, was sort of another example of where there was, the council got pulled into the process, and it was a sausage making exercise. It was, had some real problems with it. But I think for me, the outcome, really felt the outcome was beneficial.
It will.
So I just would like to see a little bit more process associated with this thing.
So I want to mention a couple of things. First, I had a conversation with Lucy Barker earlier today on the phone. I think Lucy's in the room. I'm not sure. Lucy? Yeah. Okay. And that's Serena? No, just you? Yeah, both of you. So if we wanted to, we could invite Lucy and or Serena to respond to any questions we might have.
My only response to that, Jim, is I think we have a lot of people here who would want to have input as well, and I think if you're going to ask them to, then I think anybody else should have an opportunity to speak, and that's not the way we're set up for the work session, so I would discourage that.
Well, I understand the point, so I'm not pushing it. I was aware that Lucy and Serena were out there. Another thing I'm wondering about is if with regard to a possible meeting or two after we approve the funding, if in fact that's what happens tonight, I would suggest that we ask the staff to convene that meeting rather than rely upon one person in any one of 5 agencies to convene it. Would that be a reasonable thing?
We can certainly convene the meeting. I'd want some clarity from you on what exactly you want our role to be. Are we facilitating? Are we mediating? Are we just calling the meeting and observing and reporting back to you?
Yeah, okay, fair enough. All right. Well, I have definitely heard, correct me if I'm wrong, I've heard support for continuing the $25,000 in funding. Susan has raised a reasonable objection that it might be better to hear from other people before we confirm that decision, but I don't think, tell me if I'm wrong, I don't sense that you would like to do that.
What I will say is I have spoken to many of the organizations at length, so it may be a little bit of a, at least for me personally, it's not ringing true that I've not had in-depth conversation with them, even some of the changing ideas, changing thoughts, and all that other stuff. So I guess for me, I have had lots of conversations from people that support and don't support my decision.
I, too, have had 2 long conversations with a person I respect enormously, who is very well connected to each of the agencies. We have been discussing the agency's reactions to what we did 2 weeks ago. That's had a big influence on me, and we processed that pretty thoroughly. I'm hoping that that person had a chance to speak to the heads of houses and homes earlier this afternoon. I don't know for sure that that happened, but I was trying to make sure it happened. Boy, I think we got to go with what I've been hearing. So
I would just make one last comment. Just this follows up on other people in terms of talking about doing things outside the aid to agencies, that we should be able to make decisions on emergency requests. I think it behooves us to try at some point to define what really is an emergency.
I'd agree with that 100%.
I don't think hiring a brand new staff member is an emergency personally. So I think we need to define at least try to narrow down what really is an emergency that we would consider outside the aid to agencies funding. And secondly, I would just note that today I went on the website, and just to give you an idea, and there may be some duplicates in this, I didn't have a chance to really rein in on it, but on the IRS website, there are 735 nonprofits with tax ID numbers registered in Iowa City. 735 nonprofits on the IRS website with tax ID numbers. They're not all doing social work type stuff, but still, some of them are the Greek system, et cetera, but still, that's a lot of nonprofits. I also think, and I don't know what our policy is in terms of giving money to organizations that are not established nonprofits in terms of a tax ID number, approval by IRS, et cetera. And I think that is something that should be a discussion at some point as well.
maybe that's something we could count on Jeff and staff following up on. So, trying to keep things straight in my head here. One recommendation came from Bruce about having to do with looking ahead and trying to get recommendations from the staff about how we should respond. We as a council should respond when we believe there's an emergency requiring a response. You know, so and then Susan, I guess you just made a comment related to that, having to do with defining what an emergency is. And I just raised this point with you, Jeff, about the meeting that could be set up. So with regard to the recommendation about looking ahead with regard to emergencies, I think we would ask you and staff to recommend how we might respond to situations when we believe there's an emergency requiring a response from the council that kind of falls outside of normal procedures. I don't know if that's possible for you to do, frankly, but try to take a shot at it. I think that's what we're asking you to do.
Great.
Understood.
Yeah. And with regard to the meeting, my sense is that the key thing is to invite representatives of 5 agencies that I mentioned earlier. Invite them to come together and talk about what each of them is doing with regard to delivering furniture and what constraints they face, what target audience populations they have in mind with regard to delivering furniture, and trying to hear themselves identify where the gaps are, and hence where houses into homes could play the most effective role within that network of 5 agencies. That's what I'm hearing. All right. So if staff could convene a meeting of that type, I think it would be very helpful.
Yes, we can do that.
So I guess by saying that, I'm allowing myself with John's recommendation about saying, yeah, I'm on board with 25,000, but let's wait to the December 17th before affirming that, because we want to learn about the DNR's decision, and we'd like to have that meeting occur, or at least one meeting, maybe a couple meetings occur.
Do we have 4 for that?
Well, 1, 2, 3,
Okay.
4
That's fine.
for the agreeing to 25,000, but we want to defer a formal decision to the 17th.
Yeah. If we don't have 4 for doing it now, we will go with you for agreeing, but defer it. to the next meeting, yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else on this topic? Yes, there is something else we need to discuss. The main topic, which has to do with the sources of funding. Jeff, you presented us with a memo identifying, I think, 6 different possible sources of funding. Maybe it was 5, maybe it was 7, I don't know.
Could I make
Sure.
one recommendation?
Yep.
That we not identify that tonight and we wait till the 17th?
I think so, yeah.
It's fine with me.
That's fine with me.
Yeah, okay, good
Fine
deal.
with me too.
Good deal. All right, so we'll defer that part to the 17th.
All right.
Okay,
Okay.
I think that means we can move on to our next topic.
Yes.
And our next topic is to review the city manager's office 100-day report accelerating Iowa City's climate actions. Ashley, are you going to do this, or is Jeff, or?
I'm actually going to do it and then rely heavily on Ashley and Brenda to answer all questions that you that you have for us. So we didn't create a PowerPoint for you tonight. We have the report on the screen, and what I thought I would do is just at a very high level, just walk you through the various contents. Ultimately, there's 64 actions in here. We're not going to go through all 64 tonight, but I'll try to give you a high-level overview of how the report is structured and some of the themes and the recommendations. So on August 6th, the council declared a climate crisis and also updated our carbon emission reduction targets to 40% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. These targets matched the recommendations from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. And as part of that August 6th declaration, you asked staff to produce this report, the 100-day report as it's been termed, to effectively outline how we can respond and accelerate action to achieve those new targets. Just like to thank a number of folks on staff helped create the content that's in this report, but 2 really did the heavy lifting, and that is Ashley and Brenda Nations. So really want to thank them for their efforts. So when walking through the report, we start with just again, high-level overview of our greenhouse gas emissions. It's important to understand where your emissions are coming from when you're crafting those strategies. So I'll give you just a couple of points on this. One thing I want to, we've gotten a lot of questions on whether we factor in population growth when we do our emissions reductions, and the answer is yes, we do. In this report, we note that our emissions per capita has dropped from 20.3 metric tons to 13.4 metric tons since 2010. So we're making good progress despite, as you all know, a growing population here in Iowa City. So this report, and I realize these charts are hard to see. If you have your PDF open, you can see them a little easier. But we'll look at our emissions first by sector. So who's using the energy, and 27% comes from our industrial sector, compared to 22 in residential and 20 in the commercial setting. So an important takeaway, and this will be reflected in our actions, we obviously have a small number of industrial users and industrial properties in Iowa City compared to our residential, but it's important to note that those industrial properties, while smaller in number, have actually create more emissions. And so we have some actions specifically targeted towards that industrial sector. The UI power plant and the transportation sector combine for about 30% or 29%, and then the waste sector combines is about 2% of those emissions. We can also look at our emissions by source. So this would be electricity, natural gas, coal, and by far and away, the most emissions are created by electricity, which is 46%. Natural gas follows at 29%. And coal is about 7% from that mix. Again, important to think about that when crafting actions. We know that MidAmerican is investing heavily in converting their electric supply to renewable. Thus, we need to take that into account when crafting our actions. Key stakeholder initiatives, we just, in a page and a half, tried to summarize what some of our key stakeholders are doing. I think the importance of this section is acknowledging that the Iowa City government can't achieve our targets alone. This is not like a parks plan or a bike plan where we can develop a checklist and fund it every year and start checking them off. We really have to have strong partnerships with these key stakeholders, but also the entire community. And so we have to attack, our actions have to be a little bit different. We're much more focused on community education, incentives, than we might be with some of the typical plans that you're used to seeing from your city government. We summarized the climate action and adaptation plan here in just this one chart. I think what's important to note here is this 100-day report is not a new plan. It simply tries to put some more detailed actions behind the framework that the plan created. We still feel very strongly that we have a good plan that will serve us well, but hopefully this report provides some of those detailed steps that some feel we're missing from that plan. There are 5 categories in our climate action and adaptation plan. You can see those up there: building, transportation, waste, adaptation, and sustainable lifestyle. This report is organized in the same fashion, so all those actions will fall under those 5 categories. And that's when we get into kind of the meat of the report here. We go through each of those 5 categories and outline a number of actions within each. The actions are all color-coded. The colors simply give you some sense of when we think we can initiate them. So any action you see in green, we feel like it's either already started or there's a good chance we could get started on that initiative. Not necessarily complete it, but get started in this next calendar year. And then blue and orange signify a longer period of time before those actions can be carried out. So we'll start in the buildings category, and with each of those main 5 categories, there's also some subtopic areas. So the first one here is education. Now, buildings is critically important. Buildings produce about 82% of our carbon emissions. So it's not surprising that 23 of the 64 actions we've identified fall under the buildings category. We're going to have to be very focused on how we're working with our property owners and our building owners in the community. I'm not going to go through all of the 23 activities, but a few takeaways. There's no way that we can regulate our way to the targets that you've set. We don't have, as you know, as we've gone through extensively this year, we don't have local control over our energy codes. So we can't regulate our way there. There's some things we can do, but we're going to have to rely more on education and incentives and those types of things than maybe some other communities do that you read about across the country. We do have opportunities, though, when we have things such as tax increment financing, when we have height bonuses, when we have those other kind of incentives are embedded into our zoning code or into some other city policies. We need to be asking ourselves if we're leveraging those well enough, and certainly our report indicates that we should revisit TIF policies and height bonus policies and strengthen those with respect to climate action. A number of incentives. This page lists all the incentives, and then there's actually 3 more on the following page. So there's 10 different incentive programs that we've outlined here. Again, not all to start from day one, but we feel like this is going to be a critically important part of the strategy and, frankly, an expensive part of our strategy. But we have to work with buildings, and again, we can't regulate our way to the levels that we need to. So included in this would be things like an industrial sector TIF, which we plan to launch next year with your blessing, of course, of this report, and really work with those heavy industrial users to try to cut their energy consumption down and convert as much of their energy to electric as possible. We also outlined some plans in the future, some hopes for some net zero rehabs and construction programs, building permit rebates, and electrification incentives as well. A final project that we'd like to highlight here is the proposed partnership with MidAmerican that we're working on. There's a text amendment that the Planning and Zoning Commission recently considered to allow private utilities in a public zone. You're going to be considering that as well. That's really the first step in exploring this partnership with MidAm, where they could build a large utility-scale solar development at our Water Prairie Park property. That will come to you if indeed it does work for both the city and MidAmerican. We would come forward with you, but that's an encouraging project that could produce enough solar energy to provide electrical power for about 500 homes annually, which is really exciting. Moving on, I'm going to skip through to the transportation sector. This one is really all about getting people out of vehicles and onto public transit, onto bicycles, walking. So it's very heavy on executing our public transit study, which is underway. Of course, we don't know what recommendations will come, but we know the goal that you set, which was to double ridership by 2028. So we know that there's going to be some pretty powerful recommendations in order to help us get there. And there's going to be some tough decisions for the city council to make when it comes to funding those service enhancements with transit. But that's a large piece of it. Clearly, you all have stepped up your work to provide better bike infrastructure in the community. You can see that in all parts of our community, and that's going to have to continue to, again, pull people out of those single family or out of the single occupancy cars and into different modes of transportation. And the last piece that we'll highlight on this is our electric vehicle infrastructure and our own municipal fleet. We know that people are still going to be reliant on their vehicles, so how can we make those trips as efficient as possible when it comes to energy consumption? And we certainly feel like we need to do some more work preparing the community for electric vehicles and getting our own fleet converted at a quicker rate than we have. So we move on to the waste sector. There are seven actions in this section. Now, waste, as I mentioned before, only accounts for about 2% of the emissions, but nonetheless, it's important. And because of the efforts of folks on staff like Jen Jordan and Patricia Fossum, Jane Wilch at our landfill, and refuse operations, we actually expect our trash tonnage at the landfill to go down this year in 2019, which is pretty amazing given the community growth that we've had. But that speaks to the success of the changes that they've implemented with our curbside recycling program and our curbside composting program and yard waste programs. We're seeing just great numbers that have exceeded our expectations in the number of recyclables and yard waste and compost, and now we're seeing the impact on the trash side as well with less trash coming into the landfill. So we got to
Could you just quantify that? I hate to interrupt. Could you just quantify it? Because that's just like great news.
I don't have the numbers in front of me,
everyone
but we
hears
can
that.
certainly
Okay.
put those out in an information packet
Sorry to
and let you know
interrupt.
where we're going.
That's very good news.
Yeah, it's really kudos to them for executing on those program enhancements. But we'll get you those numbers. So we need to continue on that. We need to continue to emphasize that to the community, and that's why you see a couple of education items here. So we still find that even though these programs have been out for a little while, we still have a lot of people that aren't composting and using that yard waste service. The more we can encourage people to do that, ultimately, the more emissions that we can reduce. And then on the city side, 50% of the emissions that we have direct control over as a city government organization come from the methane that's released at the landfill and at our wastewater plant. 50% of our total organization's emissions. So that's a really critical piece for us to solve. And I'd say within the next probably 30 to 60 days, you'll have a consultant contract that we'll ask you to consider. That'll be the first step of figuring out that piece of the puzzle for us. How can we better utilize that methane as opposed to the flaring it, which we currently do. On the adaptation side, there's 13 actions in this section, with the majority falling in the education section here. But this is where we really highlight the importance of trees, and it's something that this council has talked about quite a bit. But there are programs in here to incentivize more tree planting on private property, for the city to plant more trees, and then there's also some regulation here. This is one area where we do have some regulatory authority through our landscaping standards, our parking lot standards. We can actually require more trees. So those are all things that we identify that we need to look at going forward. The last section is sustainable lifestyle. There's 9 sections in this one. Again, very heavy on educational events, like an example would be the Climate Forum that we're going to have this Thursday at Big Grove in the evening. More of those types of events to bring awareness to really individuals and businesses on how they can contribute to the city's efforts here, and how can we bring them in and support their efforts to do what they do in their places of residence or businesses. That's, again, a really quick kind of run through, just broadly, those 64 actions. We want to remind folks that equity is a huge part of this. There was a lot of talk about equity during the planning phase of the Climate Action Plan. The Climate Action Commission is really focused on equity. And as we move forward to implementation on these 64 items, just know that that's a major part of our focus as well. The last couple things I'll talk about and that are mentioned in the report are the roles and responsibilities. It goes without saying it's going to take continued leadership from the City Council. You're going to have to make some tough decisions, and you're going to have to champion this at every chance you get to meet these targets. But I really want to focus on what our staffing recommendations are in this report. You've probably heard me to say this before. An effort like this requires kind of a culture shift for an organization. We have to have all of our operating departments thinking climate action. With every purchase that they're making, with every project that they're designing, every new initiative they're rolling out, they need to be thinking about that, and that's occurring. That's happening. I think we're successfully going down the right path on that, but it's going to take some time to get that at the forethought of every decision that we're making. That said, I believe we need a staff team that can work on climate action across all departments and just make sure that we continue to push that. So I'm recommending the creation of a climate action and outreach division in the city manager's office. We have several divisions in the city manager's office already, from human rights to human resources, communications, economic development. So this would be another division, and I'm proposing that we staff it with 3 positions. 2 existing positions. One would be Brenda Nation's position. She's currently our sustainability coordinator in Neighborhood and Development Services. We also would take a Public Works position and bring that into the fold. And then we have, as you know, an unfunded position in facilities management that was going to be kind of an energy analyst, assistant facilities director. We'd like to retool that and repropose that as more of an outreach and engagement person in the city manager's office here. So we would have, and these are, there's some high-level bullet points on what the responsibilities of each of these positions would do. We'll obviously have to develop full job descriptions and more fully kind of detail this out before we move forward. But we're looking at a climate action coordinator, which is what Brenda's doing now with a little bit different focus, certainly focused on this report and the climate action plan, engaging with the commission. But we'd also have a climate action engagement specialist. So this is that external person that's really looking at building those relationships, hosting community events, making sure the conversation continues in the community in various circles. And then we'd have some type of climate action analyst that's going to be more data focused. Going to help run incentive programs, going to be looking at the equity piece, going to do a lot of the data collection that currently is done by Brenda and a team of interns. And then, everybody's going to be pitching in on the outreach piece. So this 3-person staff team, we really think can elevate not only the amount of work they're doing, but that we're doing as a city, but the quality of work that we're doing, and will also be a great resource for other departments to tap into as they're thinking about how climate action impacts their daily operations. Public funding, you know that this isn't going to be a inexpensive endeavor, so we've outlined some options for public funding, from everything from a local option sales tax, utility tax, bonding, emergency levy on the property tax. What we're recommending, and this will come to the council during the budget session, is that we use the emergency tax levy to fund the operations. The emergency tax levy is something that we have not used in the past as a city, but that you all have the authority to enact, and we would recommend that we use that to generate about $1 million worth of operating revenues for this effort. Our staff positions would not be funded with this $1 million. They'll be funded with the general fund because they're already in largely the general fund. But this is going to fund incentive programs. It's going to fund the education, the kind of the advertisements, the outreach. All those things need a funding source. Additional tree plantings. We need to build a new funding source for that. So we're recommending that. All those things that will be funded by the emergency levy are going to be scalable, and that will be by design. So meaning in the future, if we decide we need to add more revenue to dial those up, council can do that through another funding source. Likewise, if there is another pressing use for that emergency fund, who knows what might come up, and the future council may say, we need that emergency levy for something else. You could scale those programs back because, again, their outreach, their additional tree planting, there's nothing in there that is going to be tied to long-term operations like a staff position. In addition to the emergency levy, we'll have some different funding sources that we'll use as well. So we outline a couple in here. So for example, we use tax increment financing. And the example that we mentioned in the report is that industrial sector building incentive program. We think that there's a good use for tax increment financing there. We would like to suggest shifting our neighborhood set-aside from the Community Development Block Grant to a neighborhood-based climate action. So currently, we have a $75,000 set-aside in our CDBG program, and we tend to do some park improvements with that in low-income neighborhoods. Just suggesting that we shift the focus of those funds. We'll still focus them on low-income neighborhoods, but look at more of the climate action activities. So it could be street tree planting or something else on public property that would be more closely tied to your climate action plan. So just a couple of examples. We just don't want you to think it's just the emergency levy that will fund these operations. We'll pull from other sources as we can, but the emergency levy will certainly be the kind of the backbone funding for the operation. Again, assuming your approval. One of the appeals of the emergency levy, in addition to it being scalable, is that we think we can offset that with a drop in the debt service levy. So our total community tax rate, we think we can keep the same or maybe even decrease slightly because of a projected drop in the debt service levy. So I think that's an appealing factor as opposed to adding a utility tax or using some other source. We wrap up the report just by trying to show you and the community that through these actions, we really believe that we can get to that 2030 target. And that's really what this report focuses on. Although we have the 2050 goal, we kind of felt we got to get to 2030 first. And by the time we get to 2030, you might have 2 or 3 more versions of this report anyway. So this table at a very high level just outlines how we feel like these actions can get us to that emissions target that we have for 2030. We did not take into account the continued investment in renewables from MidAmerican Energy. We don't want to simply rely on their investments to get us there. It's great, they're doing what they're doing, and we support that wholeheartedly. But we wanted to show the community that we can take steps to get us to that number. So ideally, these steps do get us to this number. And MidAmerican and the university and those other key stakeholders that are mentioned simply put us in a better position to get to that 2050 goal, perhaps even more quickly than than we currently have set up here. So with that, if you want a summary of the actions, you can go to the last few pages of the report, and you can see a summary of the 64 actions there. But I think I will stop talking and just let you ask questions, and we'll do our best to answer those.
I'll bet you folks have lots of comments or questions you want to bring up. Go ahead.
I would just say, I think this is an excellent report, and I think breaking it down into these various steps under these different categories makes it a whole lot understandable by everybody, and the feeling of, okay, this is where I can either focus my time and energy, or this is, and certainly as we do the education, this is how I can contribute to this. So kudos to the format, content obviously, but the format I think is very, very helpful.
On those lines, I think that the color coding too, as far as when we first talked about this, and I said, well, that's a really lofty goal, and you think, oh my goodness, how can we do all this by 2050? And it's kind of like when you clean your house, you just do one little corner at a time. So, looking at it, the color coding, okay, this is by this date, this is by that date, so it's not so overwhelming. So kudos on that.
The thing that's really impressive is that you're definitely going through here, but you're also considering how can this become impactful and in the forefront of the minds of staff and what the city does. And, like Susan just mentioned about the educational opportunities for those within our community, because I think that's going to be key in order to make this successful. And I'm also happy to hear about the staff, within this proposal, because I'm a firm believer that if we're going to really make an impact, we're going to have dedicated staff that is on this. This is a lofty goal, and we want to reach it. And so in order for us to reach it, we're going to have to make some hard investment decisions as a council, and I'm happy to know that this is here. This structure is here. There's a lot of content in here. And so one thing that I would recommend is certainly before council, kind of vote on this, is that it does go to the new commission that we just appointed.
And that is the expectation, that it will just
That's
go
what we would hope
directly
we would
to
do. Yes.
the new
Awesome.
commission.
I think they're probably anxious to review it and weigh in
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
I was wondering, at the moment, is there any plans to mandate composting in multifamily residential buildings, as well as expanding the level of recycling that's required?
No, that's not contained in the report.
Yeah, I guess definitely it's very excellent report. It's very long. Oh my God. Yeah, but it have a lot of good stuff there. And I guess since we already declared the emergency of climate here, and we need to achieve our climate, in order to achieve our climate action plan, we need this strong report that we to follow up and just start doing it. And I think, yeah, I don't have any objection for this. Just we're gonna talk about the funding for emergency later, or you want us to do that now, or?
Maybe later.
Well, it'll be part of our budget proposal.
Sure.
Certainly, if there's an uncomfortableness with the emergency levy, it would be good to know now, so it gives us more time to retool as staff, because we're pretty close to being done with the operation budget in terms of decision-making. So, yes, I think if there's an uncomfortableness with the emergency levy, let us know now. We can at least make a plan B should the next council, want to make a shift. But
I just have a question, do you know how much will be increased in taxes?
so the emergency levy, we're probably looking at about a quarter. We don't have the exact numbers. It's probably about a
Around.
25-cent increase in that emergency levy. Due to some of the other priorities that the council has articulated in the past year, we are also likely to bring the employee benefits levy back up a dime. If you remember, we reduced that a dime a year ago or so, maybe 2
Yes.
years ago. So we'll have to bring that back up, and that'll help us with some of the other initiatives that you set forward. And then on the debt service side, our goal is to make up that 35 cents. Whether we can stretch that to 40 cents or 45, I don't know yet, but ideally, I'd like to continue to drop that tax rate, but we might be doing good just to cover that 35 cents.
And
So-
you think now you might propose decreasing of the debt service levy?
Yes, I think we're in a position, remember, the debt service levy is, you collect as much as you need to pay down
I know.
your debts. And so I think we are in a position to reduce that. Otherwise, we're going to be pulling in more money than we need to repay those debts.
Sure.
So my thought would be, I think there's sort of two pieces as I see it. There's one is sort of under the hood, sort of the operational plan to implement these reductions. But I think the second part, which I think is just as important, is the visible manifestation of infrastructure that demonstrates our commitment to this plan. So, for example, one of the things I'm hoping that the next council really takes a look at is solar infrastructure on municipal buildings. As many people in the audience know, and certainly the council, our staff conducted or hired a consultant to do a comprehensive review and assessment of every municipal building in the city of Iowa City. And so that heavy lifting is done in terms of projected reductions and those sorts of things. So I would really like to see that visible infrastructure, and I'm hoping as you guys think next term that you really evaluate that. The second thing in terms of the funding, I'm glad to see you were talking about the emergency level. I know that we struggled with whether we were declaring a climate emergency or climate crisis, but this really does fit, because if you look at what we adopted from the UN, they're talking about 12 years, which is, before we have irreparable, irreversible climate catastrophe, which we're already seeing. I have a good friend whose father lives in western Iowa. Her dad lived 15 miles from the Missouri River and was flooded out. So we're seeing, that's almost biblical flooding in terms of climate impact. So it is an emergency, and I think we can, with a straight face, talk to the community and say, yes, this absolutely is justified. I'm hoping also loss is looked at as a critical component of funding, because I would like to see, it'll be expensive, but electric buses, which are extremely expensive, right? A fully electric fleet of city municipal vehicles. That would obviously have a high ticket. So we have to make that case to the community that we are willing to put our money where his mouth is, even if it means maybe raising some taxes. And the final piece of it is I did not have the opportunity to see Greta Thunberg. I wish I could have seen her. But what was so powerful observing her from afar is that Greta had no regulatory authority at all. Yet she arguably has had more influence and impact than anyone in the last 100 years in terms of this particular issue. So are any of us going to be Greta Thunberg? No. We'll sort of exist in her shadow. But I think of Martha Norbeck, who'd said that there's a community in Sweden through social marketing reduced climate gases and emissions by 20%. So if it comes down to hiring a professional marketing firm in terms of little things that people can do, I think we should do that. And look at those voluntary actions, because I think ultimately, maybe even Jeff or Bruce has said this, it is, and Susan said it, a cultural shift is going to have to take place where people are going to have to voluntarily change their day-to-day habits. So I was very impressed. I think anyone that looks at this report that does not think we're taking it seriously isn't reading the report, although we'll still continue those dissenting voices to make sure that they're keeping to push us and help us to do better. But I'm really excited about it, and I think we're definitely on the right track, both in terms of funding and the infrastructure.
Jeff, with regard to Rockney's first point concerning solar installations on municipal buildings, where do we stand on the installations on the Public Works facility and then next to True Bud Park, True Bud Lodge? Hi, Ron.
Ron Konecki, Public Works Director. We are in the process of working with Newman Munson and developing the plan for the purchasing. We'll be looking at a purchase agreement on those solar panels since we don't have the expertise on maintaining them. Right now, it looks like we'll split that purchase, the process. Public Works is a little more straightforward because the panels will be mounted on the roof. The Terry Trueblood installation is a little bit more complicated, just of trying to fit the location with those panels, with the lodge piece.
Great, thanks.
They're both fully funded, and we expect them to move forward in the early part of 2020. So it's in process. As Ron was saying, the Terry Trueblood's a little bit more difficult. We're a little bit more concerned with the aesthetics there, and we're going to have some ground-mounted solar as well. So we're trying to think about how that can kind of be an artistic piece in that park and not. If you remember when we did the feasibility study, it was focused on kind of carports over the parking lot, and we just thought if we can generate that in a little bit more artistic way that would blend in with the facility, it would probably be better. So that one's taken a little bit more thought.
And I think just one more add along to Cole's first statement about physical infrastructure. I would like to see more emphasis on adapting larger apartment buildings or other multifamily residential buildings, especially in regards to recycling and composting. I know there's a lot of UI students that want to do those, but they live in these apartment buildings in like the first 10 blocks away from the Pennacrest, and they don't have that option. That there's in the most recent renter's guide, I think still at least a third of respondents said that no recycling was offered at their apartment in violation of city code. Composting isn't an option for most people, and if they don't have a car, then they just have to throw away all their food waste or do something like they have to tag along with a friend or like go out of the way to take care of their composting. So I would like to see those become available to people who live in those apartment buildings, as most students do.
Any other comments from council members?
Well, I'll just add a few thoughts. We are responding to the climate crisis, so that's kind of the driver in this thing, and it is, it is truly, we're trying to avoid a catastrophe. I mean, that's why we declared the crisis. On the more positive side, the way I like to view this is essentially an acceleration of our strategic plan. It's in many respects just putting a much stronger emphasis on achieving the goals of our strategic plan in terms of equity and sustainability. And, Rockne, building on your notion of this being, how do we make this program more visible? Another way I've been looking at it is it should, as we, achieve these goals, the experience of being in Iowa City should feel very different. The air will be cleaner. The land will be cleaner. It should be quieter. Those electric buses, going from, single occupancy automobiles to walking, bicycling, and transit, especially on electric buses, that will change the feel of this place dramatically. It will make it a more convivial place. So, I find this a very strange experience in that, the catastrophic threat is truly, scary to try to understand that. On the other hand, the benefits of doing this are transformative. So it's sort of like mobilizing for avoiding the catastrophe, but the transformational aspects of it are truly extraordinary.
No one else? I'll just say a few words. Bravo to the staff for busting their asses, sorry, public, for the past 100 days to do exactly what we asked you to do. You've come up with a really impressive report that goes into actually substantial detail about how we can accomplish our goals, not just in terms of sort of the technical and regulatory and economic incentives part, but also staffing and funding and the like, and the equity component, which is really crucial as well. So I'm really impressed with that. And huge kudos have to go to Ashley and to Brenda and all the other staff that work with you, because I don't know who exactly did what. But I know it was not easy, and you've done great. Yeah, so bravo to you. Anybody else need to say anything? All right. Yippee. So we can move on.
Okay. I'm good.
And I think that means we're going to move to clarification of agenda items.
In the consent calendar, I'd like to see item 7C pulled out for discussion. It's the
Okay.
personnel policies update.
All right, hold on. Item 7C?
I really second that too.
Yeah, okay, it doesn't need to be seconded, but, so you want to pull item
Pull that for
7C
discussion.
out?
Right.
I've got one comment on 7C as well. We're recommending that you, when you move adoption of that, that you remove section 7.8, which is entitled Employee Response to Firearms. On reflection, I think that's a safety policy. It doesn't really belong in the personnel policies and shouldn't be tied to discipline. And in addition, the landscape of what kind of regulatory authority we have over firearms is changing all the time in terms, and we expect additional legislation at the state level. So I think we can just take it out of the personnel policy.
Eleanor, would you please repeat the item number? I know it's 7C.
Yep, it's
but-
7C, the same
Yeah,
one
but
that
there's a section.
Pauline was talking about, and the removal of section 7.8.
Section 7.8.
Yep,
Okay.
thanks.
Any other agenda items?
In correspondence, item 9K, I just had a question about that, whether there was anyone on staff that you know of, Jeff, that's currently working together with maybe the harm reduction group, or would be interested in doing something like that, because I've gone to some of their meetings and would certainly be interested in helping with that.
So we've funded that organization through our social justice and racial equity grant, so we are familiar. The police chief is also very familiar with that organization, and Chief Matherly has reached out to Sarah to have more discussion on what a municipal drug strategy or plan would be. And I think until we really understand what it is they're advocating for, it's hard for us to kind of come back to you with recommendation on whether to pursue that or not. So those
That's good to know
conversations are taking place.
About the chief, okay.
Anything else? Okay, let's move on to the info packet discussion, November the 7th. Item IP3, I see people are still drinking beer. Never mind, it's a bar check report. We can move on.
IP2, I did find interesting. A quote I'd like to read was, when adults make decisions, they should think about how their decisions affect children. It's kind of, I think, a useful perspective of, if the children of our community are doing well, the community will probably be doing well.
So more broadly, John, Andrea Cohen, on behalf of the Iowa chapter of the United Nations Association, asked us to make certain commitments. And I don't know if y'all had a chance to read that. I don't know what you think, whether you want to make certain commitments to promote, protect, and realize the rights of the child in celebration of the 30th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So I don't know if we have to discuss that tonight, but we're being asked to do that.
Yeah, I thought it was, I'm happy to move forward with doing something. I don't think that we can do it in this venue, in this immediate time. I mean, her what, why, how, when, who, I think would really take some time to kind of think about, and how's the best way to relate that to city policy, city action, et cetera.
I agree. So what do you suggest we do?
Our Human Rights Office is already looking into it. I think you could probably count on them to come up with something, unless you want to come up with your own ideas. Stephanie
great.
and Kristen and crew will handle it.
I think it's awesome.
Surprise.
Yes.
Can we move to the November 14th packet?
Yes. Have
Anything on it?
IB6,
Yes.
Johnson County Mobile Home Task Force. Pauline and I are working on that task force, and I guess all of us can do. But I just want to know, like, when they give us this report, what our next step as a council?
I was going to bring that up. So I was very much hoping that, as everyone knows, I got 1 month left, if it's possible, to do at least a work session on this. one of the things that was really wonderful about this task force is we had the city of North Liberty, we had Coralville, we had Johnson County, obviously the city of Iowa City, and we completely fully acknowledge that it's a regional issue, but at the same time, each individual entity has their own needs, their own experience with mobile homes. And so one of the things I think we are really hoping we're doing is we have this very substantive report is to have some time, and it probably won't just take one work session, but maybe a couple or even more than that, that we would sort of update where we are as a community in terms of policies and how we can be proactive in terms of our mobile home policy, whether there's anything prospectively into the future we can do. One of the things that generated this was, of course, people know that we've seen a lot of outside entities bidding upwards of 2 times the assessed market value of these properties. So, and it's happening very frequently. And so really hoping we can get support for a work session, have a more extended conversation on that. And if possible, I'd like to do it in the month of December if possible, but certainly it's something the council should, I think, evaluate.
I would echo what they've said. I hope you had a chance to actually read through the recommendations and also, especially right in the beginning, to see the list of members that were on the task force. It's a nice mix of individuals with an interest in the well-being of folks, residents of mobile homes. Especially pleased that Senator Zach Walz has been a part of our ongoing discussions because he's been seeking legislation for the last couple of years. Because it's depressing to know that Iowa is one of just a few states that have very marginal protections for mobile home residents. Very, very depressing to see that data. And he's been seeking legislation on that state level to provide better protection for these individuals as far as like eviction notice and rent increase notices. So that's very important. I would add to Rockne, of course, we can talk about it in a work session, but other municipalities, as you can see from the members, were included, North Liberty and Coralville, and so I would suggest that it be placed on a joint entities meeting so that we can discuss it in whole, as well as we should also encourage our lobbyists to keep their ear to the ground and know that it's a priority of ours in the community to watch for this and to encourage it to be passed.
So is there support for putting this topic on one of our last 2 work sessions of the year?
Yes.
I'm not sure what's.
Do we have time?
I'm
I
not
don't
sure.
know what's on.
Yeah, we don't have anything scheduled for either except your earlier discussion about houses into homes on December 17th. So we could put it on the 3rd. Is that the first meeting?
Okay.
The 3rd?
Well, without objection, let's do that.
Sure.
Okay.
Great.
Who do you want us to ask anybody to present, or are you going to, Rockne or Mazahir,
we have
Pauline, are
3
you going to?
people
Well,
who
yeah,
remember
I
that.
think all 3 of us can work on,
Yes, coming out.
discussing
present.
that.
Okay.
So,
Perfect.
yep.
And we have Sarah Barron,
We have
Sarah
Sarah
Barron is
here.
here, too.
who's led our task force and has been very helpful
done a
in putting
fantastic
it all
job, by the
together.
way.
So
Yeah.
hopefully she'll be able to be present at that.
To come and present.
Okay, any other items on that particular information packet?
Well, one thing I'd like to discuss, and I guess would fall under pending work session topics, and we have an item on our formal agenda that's, our response to the loss of our rental caps. And so I would like to ask for your support to have a work session to discuss where that issue is, so that we as a council have an understanding of what exactly is in place. As you see in the formal agenda, there were a number of things done a couple of years ago. I don't know I'd like a refresher as to kind of where we are with all of that.
Oh, all the code amendments?
All the
Yeah.
code changes. But the bottom line is I'm concerned that what may happen if we just simply approve this change that's on our agenda, and that's basically our response. So I'd like to have a work session where we sort of consider this whole issue, and one thought I'm having in terms of what might come out of that work session might be scheduling a meeting in the community, kind of a good neighbor meeting where that information, it could be here, doesn't have to be in an actual neighborhood venue, but to hear back from the residents, because they too, I think, are in the dark on this. There's not any clear understanding of what's happening, and what is happening.
I do wonder, will there be some staff?
So during tonight's presentation, the NDS staff will give you just some bullet point overviews on what we have done leading up to this point, because as you know, this has been an ongoing kind of chess game, for lack of a better term, ever since the state took away the familial status. Okay, they did that. We put in the rental caps and did a number of things, and now, they took away the rental caps and we're back at it. So we can give you that synopsis tonight, very kind of, again, bullet points, and then, you can decide if you want to do more. The thing I would say is we don't have a whole lot of other options. We feel good about what we've done, and time will tell, how the market responds to that, but make no mistake about it, the state has taken away a lot of our local control on this issue.
So there's a suggestion that we put this on the pending work session list. Is there any objection to that?
I do have a question. Is it to update council? Is it more for the community to really be either engaged in the conversation, or because I felt like the packet was pretty in-depth.
A work session, as it's typically structured, doesn't provide an opportunity for community comment, and I think that's important. So, I would like to have the opportunity for the community to ask questions, to give their thoughts in terms of what's being proposed and whether that strategy is adequate.
I guess I'd like to maybe come back to this after we go through this in the formal meeting and kind of see
Sure.
what comes out of that, and then decide what is the best way to move forward with something.
Yeah, okay, that sounds reasonable to me.
Sounds good to
Yes.
me.
So as we get to that item, please remember to
Yeah.
bring it up. Okay.
If I don't, I'm sure John will. One of us will.
Okay, we have like 1 minute, and then we're going to stop our work session. So with regard to the updates on assigned boards, commissions, and committees, we can do that at the end of the formal meeting when we're going through that kind of stuff. So are there any other items on this in this information packet you want to mention? I'll mention IP number 9, the Citizens Police Academy. So there's an opportunity to enroll in that academy. You have to apply not later than Monday, January the 20th for the 2020 academy. It's a great opportunity to learn about the Iowa City Police Department and what they do, what challenges they face, and that kind of thing. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Very nice. I went to that one. I encourage everyone to go. Yeah, it's nice.
Anything else?
That's it.
Okay, I don't hear anything else, so we're going to put an end to this particular work session and reconvene at 7 for the formal meeting.